Okay. We were talking about the loss of consciousness and the fragmentation of the one. So, this fragmentation is the way by which the one appears as the many. A dispersion of the infinite one into its own infinity. So, this is like the inversion. See, the one, we tend to, because of our fragmentation, we live in the fragmentation. And so we yearn for the one. It's as if fragmentation is known only too well by us. And we yearn for the one. But the one is also multiple. If this is the entire conundrum of the Isha Upanishad, right? If you, in your seeking to escape your multiplicity, move to the one, the true one, right? Not the one that tries to contain the infinity, but the one that only exists, the only one. If you go to the only one and experience it as the only one, then also you've lost the fact that the one is also infinite. And our creation, this is the reason this problem is happening is, as I said, due to the fact that our experience is constrained by the envelope of avidya or the overmind that is creating these contradictions, discrete realities. Either you have one or you have many. You can't have both of them. So this is the reason why we can have the experience of the absolute one. This is why Advaita Vedanta is actually called Keval Advaita Vedanta. The word Kevala, this is why Sankhya, the goal of Sankhya is Kaivalya. Kaivalya. The goal of Jainism is Kaivalya. The term Kaivalya is best translated as exclusive. It is the exclusive one, the one that excludes every other. Or you could say, the one to which there is no other. It's the absolute one. But in talking about the absolute one, we also are talking about the exclusive one. In other words, the one that has excluded every other. If we say the one doesn't have any other, we lose the fact that the one is also other to itself. The one is the same and yet the other to itself. This is its infinity. And in the way in which overmind differentiates all realities and gives them a place for themselves, it inverts the infinity of the one and, as it were, gives it independence. That is the truth of the avidya. That's why the Isha Upanishad is saying, the one, which is the reality of vidya, is a kind of darkness. The many, which is the reality of the avidya, is also a kind of darkness. In fact, it's going to say the reality of the many is a kind of darkness. The exclusive one is an even greater darkness. Because from that darkness there is no return. From this darkness there is a evolutionary process that will get us somewhere. But from that darkness there is no return. It's an escape. So it's saying, if we can find the two as one, the one that is also infinite, which does not mean that the one wipes out the many. This is why the metaphor of the many rivers that run to the ocean and lose themselves in the ocean is an insufficient metaphor, because the rivers get cancelled in the ocean. It is only if the rivers retain their identity in the ocean that we could say that the many and the one coexist, see, are known together as one.
Would you say before that one is the one that tries to contain all, and isn't at that level, then it knows every part of itself by identity, so automatically includes everything?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that what you're talking about is supermind. That is Vijnana, as we were discussing it. Vijnana.
I'll settle for that.
Yeah. The thing is, it doesn't contain or include. That's why terms like contain or include, they create a container. There's no container here. It is its infinity. See? So the fact is that that's the thing about the chameleon, that can become anything it wants. It contains its infinity. So each one of its possibilities is nothing but itself. So it coexists. See, the one coexists with its radical infinity. See? That's why they don't erase each other. See? So that's the mind does that. It kind of takes the two and splits them apart. And says you can either have this or you can have that, you see. Well, once you go beyond the mind to supermind, you see that the two are one. That's the conundrum. This appearance of multiplicity is also a quantification of experience in terms of beginnings and ends. Now we are talking about it in spatial terms. We are talking about one, many, as if it's some kind of space in which it is happening. But this is also happening in time. And in time we experience reality as beginnings and ends. There are no real beginnings and ends. This is the trick of the memory, right? That if I think about what happened yesterday, it'll come to me as little chunks. Okay, this happened. I'd see an image, for example, and I can then, as soon as I hone in on it, it spreads into a little space of time. And that's a discrete beginning-end event. See, that's an event. Right? But is there any such discrete event? The more I look at it, the more it spreads. What is the envelope of each event? But there is the way in which mind constructs beginnings and ends to create events. And there are some finalities about them. The day begins and the day ends. So there are cosmic finalities that are like anchor points to the sense of the discreteness of time. Objective discreteness and subjective discreteness. The subjective discreteness is our life. We are born and we die.
But except if you keep flying around the world and the day never begins or ends, it's always just the time. But, I mean, isn't time part of the illusion that we should just get over?
Well, that's the thing, that this is the way in which, just like with space, the one becomes many, with time, the same thing is happening. That which is without any time, timeless, becomes available as time, becomes available as eventing, becoming events. So that is another aspect of the becoming many of the one becoming many in space and time. Just as the infinite one fragments itself, thus sacrificing itself in multiplicity, so its temporal attribute of eternity sacrifices itself in the form of time, as an eternal succession of beginnings and ends. See? If this, what you're calling the illusion of time, if we got rid of it and experienced the timeless, there would be no evolution. Evolution is the way by which that same point zero by which the eternal knows itself in a graded way can proceed through graded self-becoming.
Okay, take it back because I like the evolution thing. Let's stick with that.
This discretenesses of space and time become the context and mechanism for the evolution of consciousness, emerging from its opposite in giving a specific form to the play between Ishvara and Shakti, as made possible by the supreme conscious force, the Divine Mother. See, this is the manifestation of the Divine Mother. This one way of talking about it is, this is the illusion of Maya. You see? If you talk about it like that, then what you're looking for is an out. But if you see it as this is the manifestation of the Divine Mother, then you realize the double reality of the Divine Mother. This is the multiple manifestation of divine love between the Supreme Being and its own consciousness force. The Supreme Being and its own consciousness force are two infinities. It is, going back to the image of the mirror, the divine looking at self in a mirror. This is why we have repeatedly the image of Ardhanarishwara, the half male, half female androgynous form of Shiva, and the female form looks at herself in the mirror. Called Yoga Darpana, the mirror of yoga. In the mirror of yoga, the infinity, the radical infinity of the one becomes mirrored, becomes an other. And that other is equally radically infinite. And between the two, divine Ananda becomes manifest as divine love.
Join time to the timeless poles of a single joy.
Yeah. In this evolutionary play, we see a number of properties of the divine that are evolving. We have noted the property of consciousness evolving out of the inconscience. Similarly, there is knowledge evolving out of ignorance, bliss evolving out of insentience, oneness evolving out of multiplicity, and power evolving out of impotence. These are the negative inverse point zeros. Each one is a qualitative point zero. Sri Aurobindo refers to these as the sons, S-U-N-S, the sons of the supermind. The sons of the realm of Aditi, the undivided solar goddess, S-O-N-S, who are the S-U-N-S, the sons. All these are properties of the divine that emerge from what appears to be its own opposite, a non-being. And it is the Divine Mother as the creative consciousness of the divine that creates the conditions of such an ordered evolution by becoming this apparent inconscience and guiding its process as the evolutionary force. She is both the point zero, the becoming of the opposite, the inversion, and the evolutionary force that is within it. Thus we find that the Divine Mother has become the inconscient foundation of this creation and accepted this inconscience to become the evolutionary force within it. In his text, The Mother, Sri Aurobindo points out that this is why our manifestation can be considered the sacrifice or holocaust of the Divine Mother, more than the holocaust of the Divine Purusha. From this condition of inconscience, she evolves the powers of consciousness, force, delight, oneness, and knowledge. It is for this reason that this universal condition is known as avidya, the ignorance, the loss of the knowledge of God, the self-forgetting or oblivion of God, and the denial of God. These are two different things. The oblivion of God is one thing. The denial of God is another. Here the oblivion of God is the ignorance, while the denial of God is the choice of the ignorance to remain ignorant. It's a force. There is a force. The force of self-concentration of the divine reaches its infinite point in a choice to remain ignorant. It is a negative choice that we may call falsehood, the origin of evil in this universe. The properties of the Divine Mother must emerge as if by an awakening from the self-oblivion of God. But if this were all, there would be an evolution of knowledge, delight, and oneness, but not of force or power. It is by contesting the denial of God at every step that the power of the divine evolves. And it is this that gives the appearance of labor, struggle, and painful combat to this universe. This is the foundation of pain. This is the foundation of struggle. If this was not there, there would be no struggle.
Can you repeat that last part? About the pain and the struggle, please.
So, you see, if it was just an evolution of knowledge, delight, and oneness, it could be like gas. In other words, you compress gas and take off the compression, or take off the lid. And gas will gradually, it seems to be immediately, but it'll take some time and it'll fill in everything. It's a automatic process. There is no struggle there. But if you exert a force constantly against which that has to push, it has to generate another opposite, contrary will and struggle against that which is pushing down. This is the evolution of power. Evolution of power is an essential aspect of the evolution of this cosmos. By contesting the self-negation of the divine emerges as power.
So
Yeah.
it seems like to me that when you're talking, the emphasis is on separation. And separating here we have the multiplicity and here we have the one,
Yeah.
and how they're separated.
Yeah.
If you had a metaphysic of a process metaphysic,
Yeah.
would that be the mother in action in thought?
Yeah, so that in a way what we are saying is a process metaphysic may also be like that gaseous expansion. In other words, there does not need to be in a process metaphysic a pain or a struggle to overcome a force that is contesting it at all times.
Because you're not emphasizing separation.
You're not emphasizing separation. The emphasizing, as you said, emphasizing implies that a force is being applied to keep things separate. This is the force of the overmind, the Shakti of the overmind, the overmind Maya, as Sri Aurobindo calls it. That is a force to keep things separate. All the separations as separate categories. And why? So that each has its independence. And out of that independence, it may know individually the paradoxical oneness of everything.
But if you had a process metaphysic,
Yeah,
maybe you wouldn't, maybe you would already know, or you would already have the basis of knowledge.
yeah, yeah. You would, but you wouldn't then be able to, hold the need or reason for the evolution of power.
You wouldn't need it, or you wouldn't need it so much, depending on how strict the
Exactly.
technique was.
Exactly. So, you see, the thing is that ultimately that's why the mother says at one place, she says, at the bottom of everything, it is a question of power. And in a way, she, in saying that, is affirming the notion of the will to power. The will to power means the power over every limitation, eventually the power over that which keeps things separate. That which keeps things separate is the power of the overmind. So, can we have power greater than the power of the overmind? This becomes, in a way, the question, the problem, looked at from the viewpoint of power.
It seems like, I'm going back to this idea
Yeah.
of process metaphysics, it
Yeah.
seems like in a process metaphysic,
Yeah,
you would have power built into the process, because it's movement, it's activity, it's already power.
yes, it is. If you think about it like that and say that there is a process metaphysic in which there is a evolution of power as part of the process that is contested constantly. This idea of contestation we cannot forget, because otherwise we cannot account for the tremendous amount of struggle from the very beginning to every point of our existence. As I said, a process metaphysic does not need to include that. A process metaphysic can talk about the expansion or evolution of consciousness in a similar way to the way in which gas fills a vessel from which a constraining pressure has been removed. It will take a certain amount of time, but inevitably get there, and there needs to be no pressure or force against which it is working.
There is also
It's just like a point zero. So just like a point zero, like the metaphor of the prince that I was talking about, is actually a process metaphysic without the power to constrain it. Because that's the problem with that metaphor, right? If you have a prince to whom everything belongs, who doesn't know what belongs to it, it's the model of the evolution of knowledge, but not of the evolution of power. Because it starts with a foundation of ground zero and says, okay, In a systematic way, I'll get to know everything, but nothing is opposing it. Gradually, its measure of time is the amount of time it will take to know everything. But nothing is opposing it. But if at the same time it knows that it can't even take a single step because something is stopping it from doing that, that it has to develop tremendous resources of power within itself to move even a single step.
And isn't that, I mean, it just feels a little overdone, this opposition thing. It could lighten up a little, give us a little bit more chance of experiencing the oneness and the unity and all that good stuff, you know, and then, okay, but
Who is the us?
I know.
The us is us,
Yeah.
sitting here in community, pushing back. We're the seekers pushing back
Yeah.
with you helping us.
Yeah, the us is ultimately the divine. The us is the divine. The us is the one who has denied itself. This is why, you know, if you think about, you know, the mystical traditions, a lot of this is actually encapsulated in Christianity. That's why we talk about the abjection of God. We talk about the state of abjection is not even becoming object, it's becoming abject, it's becoming eject. Something that is ejected out. And out of that state must return to its fullness of divinity. Yeah.
This is wonderful, this notion that there's this evolution of power too.
Yeah.
And I think I'm aware of the evolution of consciousness and the evolution of ideas.
Yeah.
But this evolution of power, and I just feel that is really crucial also
It
for
is.
today.
It is.
It's kind of like we've not gone there,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. It is. It
It's
is
like
crucial.
everything's going to be solved by an evolution of consciousness,
Yes.
an evolution of ideas.
Yes. It's
but
not.
this is a whole.
This is the reason why, even in terms of, you know, our age as the modern age, as the post-enlightenment age, that in its image of enlightenment has privileged knowledge, the big turn occurs with Nietzsche, who says that it really is the will to power, not the will to knowledge, that is the secret to our times and our beings. Yeah, Charles.
Yeah, what's, I think, with that, what's key, or what are the tools to gather that particular power? It's a power of consciousness.
Yeah.
So we know, like with science, how to gather certain kinds of power.
Yeah.
But really the power of for number one, there's the will,
Yeah.
period, right?
Yeah.
There's the peace
Yeah.
that needs to come down as the foreground, and then there's the concentration.
Yeah.
So when we do tapasya, that's how we're gathering
Yeah.
powers through. These are sacred powers that we gather.
Yeah.
So it isn't just given to us.
No.
Right. We actually have to use the will to create, and so
Willpower.
there's a willpower.
Yeah.
Of sorts, but it's counter to what we think of in the vitalist power.
Right. Now, that's absolutely true. That's why it's really important to focus on this notion of the will to power. I think it becomes really central. What is the will to power? And even if we read somebody like Nietzsche, that's where he's going. Because he's saying to get that power, you have to go under. He's using that term, to go under. And what does it mean to go under? It's really a surrender. A surrender to something that not your power. That's where the whole idea of all life is yoga comes from. The power of yoga is the evolutionary will of the Divine Mother. That's already there as part of this ground zero. That's the thing, that the Holocaust of the Mother is her disappearance in consciousness and her own power of consciousness to emerge from there. She's both. So, can we bring our will into contact with that will which is already here. And if you read that the first chapter of the Synthesis of Yoga, where Sri Aurobindo for the first time explains what he means by all life is yoga, this is exactly what he's talking about. All life is the evolution, is the yoga of nature, trying to exceed the conditions of its own self-imposed limitations and arrive at its truth.
So I also have, I wanted to say about this inevitability of matter itself, like everything as if is doomed to die, be it solar system, be it stars, be it our
Right.
body. So how do you put falsehood, that power of being ignorant, with this inevitability to death, or a cycle, like which is, because it seems that sometimes the renewal, oxidation, and burning energy, it's like a fire, but that also has this twist of kind of making you part of that process of ever never-ending type of cycle.
Yeah.
So these two are tricky.
Yeah, so that becomes the cosmic condition, right? The cosmic condition is given to us like that by this tremendous force, this tapas, the chit tapas, that holds this zero in place, that zero which repeats. What is it that repeats? The very image of time as repetition, the eternal repetition, is the eternal repetition of death as far as this cosmos is concerned. See? But within it is the secret will to overcome that. That is why, kind of philosophers of our time have used the term negentropy, the negative will to entropy. And that is the open world, the open cosmos, where something is constantly trying to overcome that repetition of death. But it cannot within the conditions of the cosmos, because that's what's holding it together. So this is, we come back to, you need then the same power that has actually put this thing in place to open the gates. That's the Shakti. That's the avatar of the Shakti. That's Savitri. And that is what Savitri is about. Both in terms of the story as a metaphor and in terms of the work of the mother.
As you were speaking about these opposing energies, the question that's coming up for me, which maybe is too broad, or it's just like, is sacrifice a necessity of evolution? Like, even with the sacrifice of Prakriti and Purusha, like, it seems like it's embedded in that whole dynamic.
Yeah.
Like, this is the will to power requires a sacrifice.
Exactly. It does. The will to power requires that sacrifice, which is the original sacrifice, and the double sacrifice, as Sri Aurobindo was putting it.
Can you call the sacrifice as surrender?
Yeah.
Yeah, but here it is a surrender, if you want to call it that from our side, but it is a sacrifice of the Divine Lord and the Divine Mother, because the Divine Mother is sacrificing her power of consciousness to its opposite in conscience. And the Divine Lord, the Divine One, is sacrificing its power of unity to its multiplicity. These are the kind of sacrifices, because by sacrifice is meant, if you're conserving power, right? The power of conservation by which the many are the one, right?
And
Or the
will
power
they
of consciousness.
Will they sacrifice only if you surrender?
Exactly. I mean, that's Sri Aurobindo uses the term reverse sacrifice for that. The surrender is the reverse sacrifice. that is given to us to embody,
Which requires the will that we're talking
which requires the will, exactly, that we are talking about. Exactly. And ultimately, the force of will that can become one with the divine will that is at work in the world.
What necessitates the divine sacrifice? What was, this is again going back to the point, but what is forcing what necessitates the divine sacrifice to occur in the first place?
So, to talk about necessity is again to talk about some kind of reason. And again, I will invoke the mother saying, since it exists, it is among the infinite possibilities of the divine that had to exist. The possibility itself is its necessity. Anything that can is.
Coming back to
So, yeah, so earlier when you were talking about the pain and struggles, so is that because of evolution of power or evolution in general?
Evolution of power in particular. Pain and struggle arise due to the evolution of power. The others don't require it.
can we say that from the pain and struggle, for example, we all have a kind of pipe dream or wish that all religions should come together and go beyond and see the oneness, right? But that doesn't happen. They fight with each other. Is it like a struggle and pain we go through, that whole ideologies goes through, so that the divine become more powerful at the end, so that everybody can see that the idea of the oneness and the similarity of all the religions?
So power here, you have to understand power. It's not the divine becoming, yes, the divine becoming more powerful in us.
Yes.
You know, the divine is already omnipotent, but we are the divine growing up. And so the power becomes greater in us. But what is meant by power is power over limitation. You see, the very fact, as you say, that we are fighting with each other is because we are constrained by the power of our ignorance. We are at that stage that we are not seeing enough. We are not seeing the one. So we are constrained by that power, the limitation of consciousness that prevents us. We need to develop that power to overcome that. So maybe we can take a moment of meditation on this really important issue of the will to power as that which is the very source of all the struggle in the universe, and our need to make ourselves one to the will of the Divine Mother that is at work in the universe as the yoga of the cosmos itself in each of us, that we can come into contact with it and aspire with its aspiration. Okay, we can come back. Yes, or
not exactly another side, but a sort of other side of this, are following our own svabhava, the real idea coming through to us as the guide to which we apply the force of the will test.
Sure. Yeah, sure. That brings us to the notion of the cosmic Mahashaktis and also here to the triple soul forces, because according to Sri Aurobindo, the manifestation proceeds along these four major directions, and each of our psychic realities is connected to one of these. So there is a predominance, as it were, to maybe knowledge or power or love or service. You see, these kind of qualities of the divine. And so the thing is that in the evolution, whatever one of these is the manifesting power, behind it is the consciousness of the evolution of power. You see? So, as you're saying, depending on how the personal manifestation has its own emphasis, within it, the evolution of power, the struggle for overcoming limitations is working. See, so that is almost like a master note to the manifestation. The cosmic evolution of knowledge, force, delight, and oneness is overseen and effected by qualitative forces of the immanent divine consciousness that we can relate to as goddess forms. Sri Aurobindo writes about these forms as the four primary powers of becoming of the Divine Mother, or what he calls the four Mahashaktis. Of these, Maheshwari is the one evolving knowledge out of ignorance. Mahakali is the one who contests the falsehood in the ignorance and effectuates the emergence of divine force or power. Mahalakshmi evolves the power of delight and harmony from the insentience of the material ignorance, and Mahasaraswati represents perfection and skill in works, constructing oneness out of the fragmentation of being. Sri Aurobindo writes about these four Mahashaktis and their relationship with the immanent divine consciousness very beautifully in mantric language in his text, The Mother. And I'm not going to read that because it's something that we have come across and we can read directly from the book, The Mother. These four Mahashaktis are at work in the cosmos, but their origin is in the supermind, where they are not emanations, but aspects of the one divine goddess. So you see, there are three levels at which these are acting. One is in the supermind. In the supermind, they are self-deployments of the one, of what Sri Aurobindo, using the Vedic language, calls Aditi, the undivided Divine Mother. The undivided consciousness who emanates, or who doesn't emanate but becomes, whichever one of these four is required for whatever work. In the overmind, they become four different goddesses. And this is why the Mother says that, in the image of her yantra, where you have the central circle and then the four emanating sectors and then the 12 emanating sectors, she says that if your surrender is to any one of these four, the four emanating sectors, and you lose sight of the central divine, then you make yourself available to the war of the goddesses. The war of the goddesses comes from the fact that for anything that you want to do, each of the goddesses has a different action. Each one will tell you to do something else. But what is it that you need to do is determined by the central Shakti to whom all four belong. This is the reason for making them inhere in the one. You cannot split the four from the one. You cannot look to one of the four over the others, because she will act in you through one of the four in each case. That's necessary.
So what should be the goal?
The goal is to surrender to the Divine Mother, whose four aspects are the four Mahashaktis. So even if it is a work of knowledge or a work of power or whatever, the specific action that will come to you will be determined by the Divine Mother utilizing these four Mahashaktis as she sees fit.
And these four are knowledge, power.
So here, knowledge, power, love or devotion, and oneness. Or another way of talking about it is skill.
I was gonna say, it feels like not so much you focusing on them, but that they come for you
Yeah.
in different situations.
Yeah.
You know, they,
But your surrender is to the one who will then bring to you
yeah.
which one is necessary.
And most action requires a blending
Exactly.
of these, and it's
Exactly.
not up to us
Yeah.
to try to figure out what that blending
Right.
is. That's harmony.
Exactly.
To surrender to that.
Yeah. So this is the way in which, the same kind of movement from Vijnana to the Ajnana of ignorance, and the splitting of the multiplicity to the many, you see the four, from the one to the four, and then to the three. This is where we come to the triple soul forces. The third level is inside the ignorance. And inside the ignorance, the four become three, because there are specific ways in which they are constrained to act by the ignorance. Their power is further curtailed. At the overmind, the curtailment of their power is in the specialization of their force. Each one works at odds with the others. But within the ignorance, the curtailment of the power is not just the specialization of their force, but the fact that they are to some extent at the same level of footing as the powers of falsehood. They have no power over the powers of falsehood. They are relative, completely relativized to the falsehood.
I want to clarify something
Yes.
about the four forces.
Yes.
And to worship the mother, and then she decides. So when you mentioned, I think I heard this for the first time, but when you mentioned it got me like a fear factor. So, and the other question is, do they also within themselves have ego?
In fact, no. I mean, they are ego. That's an interesting term, because ego is actually a sense of separation. Ego is identity with separation.
Right.
That you are something, but you're also separate from others. So, from that point of view, yes, because each one is an archetype with distinct roles. And yet, what the mother says is that they know of each other's existence. And there is a kind of harmony. They work together in a harmonious fashion. But at the same time, each one, if they are given a certain role, will do it differently from the others. And so it isn't really that they are fighting with each other, but they are still specializing according to who you called it to the picture.
So we need to be smarter and just go to the mother.
Yeah.
She will say.
Yeah.
So is that why like consciousness is hyphenated force? Because it's not a particular quality.
Yeah.
It's kind of a reminder It's just, it's if you bring awareness, or you are aware, whatever quality needs to
Yeah.
come through that will be the effective force.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
So from 4, because of ignorance, they become 3, which
Yeah.
we are calling as triple force.
Yeah.
And what are the 3?
Those 3 are related to the 3 rungs of consciousness within the ignorance: matter, life, and mind.
Matter.
Interestingly, in Savitri, Sri Aurobindo does not present the Divine Mother in these 4 aspects. He gives us a canto in which he presents them as triple soul forces. Moreover, he presents them not as invincible divine powers, but as emanations of the Divine Mother that are constrained by the ignorance. These forms also have their origin in supermind. But within the cosmic ignorance, they have accepted subjection to the law of ignorance. A law of fragmentation, self-forgetting, and self-denial. The fragmentation of being in the ignorance creates a world of relations, a relative world. In this relative reality, all things are relative. There is no absolute. Thus, the aspects of the Divine Mother here are not supreme. They cannot vanquish the powers of falsehood, death, and ignorance arising from the self-oblivion of God. They must work within the ignorance, accepting its qualities and forces as relative equals. This necessary acceptance of their opposites as realities by the emanations of the Divine Mother results in a pitched battle without end. There is no end to the battle. And this, if we think about history and if we think about the cosmos and about the earth, is the picture that the sort of hapless condition of the world that comes to our eyes when we think particularly from the vantage of our own time period in history. We never learn the lessons of history. We repeat them again and again. We are always on the brink of disaster. What have we learned? Right now, today, we are at the very brink of extinction. It's a pitched battle without end. Since non-being and being, God and the denial of God are given equal play in the cosmos, we have something which appears like a Manichaean reality, a radical and insoluble duality of darkness and light. Of course, we can resolve this by finding a way to escape the cosmic condition into a transcendent absolute where there are no dualities and all is undifferentiated and one. But in doing so, we lose the world and whatever meaning it may hold. The war between the Devas and the Asuras, or the divine and anti-divine forces in the cosmos, forms the bulk of the hymns of the Rig Veda. The Upanishads bring out in sharp relief the transcendent Brahman as the absolute beyond good and evil. But it also and equally tries to establish the relations between the cosmic duality and the transcendent one without a second, and human purpose in this cosmos. The Gita in particular emphasizes the necessity of the continuing struggle between the divine and asuric forces, indicating the evolutionary purpose served by this struggle. The struggle seems to be endless, but we have to go through it. There is a necessity to it. In the Puranic story of the churning of the ocean, taken from the Vishnu Purana, we find that Devas and Asuras symbolically related as co-workers in the emergence through churning of divine immortality. So this is, as you were saying, another model to look at it. That from another point of view, this incessant war is also a collaboration, a necessary churning, a kind of polarity at odds that is causing something to rise by its churning. Just as when we churn the buttermilk, the butter comes to the top. By this means, both their relativity and their inextricable necessity to the cosmic evolution are brought forward. In the canto on the triple soul forces, this inextricable nature of Daivic and Asuric elements are represented in an even more intimate manner in the form of coupled doublets, doomed to an eternal coexistence without the intervention of a greater transcendent Shakti, one that can annul the foundational fragmentation of the ignorance. So long as this is the condition, the cosmic condition, the Chit Tapas is holding in place, the duality is inextricably bound. Neither has power over the other. They are doomed to eternal strife. And here, Sri Aurobindo shows them as two in one reality. See, there's always a goddess and a distorted form, a negative form of the goddess that is linked and connected to the goddess. She can't, everything she says, which is of the nature of her aspiration, receives a warped echo from below.
As though that wasn't enough, Sri Aurobindo adds the Titans in here.
Yeah.
And what is their role? The male component here.
Yeah, that's the second.
They're not exactly consorts. They're
No.
They're separate
Yeah.
existence.
This is the thing, that they're, see, the way the Puranic gods exist, they exist with tamed vitals. That those are the animal mounts, the tamed vitals. But the way in which these goddesses exist, they exist with something they're trying to tame but can never tame. That is a warped echo that always is a companion with whatever they are stating.
And the Titans are?
Those are the Titans.
Those are the Titans.
Those are the Titans.
Oh.
In the Indian tradition, the Devas and Devis are shown iconographically sitting on top of animal mounds, vahanas. Each of these animals represents a purified and transformed form of vitality. But if we consider even earlier representations of divine female fertility goddesses in India, we find some of them standing on top of distorted dwarfs known as yakshas. Sri Aurobindo's depiction of the goddesses in the triple soul forces resembles closely the appearance of these figures. They form composites in inextricable relation with the evolving ignorance, where they can dominate their opposites but cannot transform them. This dialectical duality with the powers of ignorance reminds us of the Jungian notion of the shadow, an idea Sri Aurobindo affirmed in his letters. The shadow of the ignorance absorbs the light of the goddess and creates ignorant, distorted forms in perpetual rebellion against the Mother Shaktis. Sri Aurobindo's adaptation also carries social overtones. Unlike the happy, obedient vitality of the animal vahanas in traditional Indian mythology, these unhappy yaksha mounds confront us with modern subalternity, the colonization of alien and unwilling creatures, unwilling cultures by superior forms of consciousness. In these complex composites, one feels at once the idealism and frustration of the goddesses and the rebellious unhappiness of their shadowy opposites. Maybe we can take a moment and meditate on this inextricable nature of the divine and anti-divine forces in each of us. The fact that they don't even belong to us. They're the cosmic constitution of all nature. That these two are at odds inside each of us. Yeah.
About just a few minutes ago when you talked about us not learning from the history and we are at the brink of this
extinction.
Extinction. Is it also part of evolution? Because, and that happens parallelly, that the extinction happens and it's already, a new thing is already growing in some part of the world or ours, and it's a parallel process.
So this is the thing. That's the really central question. That that's the value of really coming to an assessment of these forces in the world and in ourselves. That the more we recognize the power, we have a power, a sense that we can control and achieve something by ourselves. But the more we really understand the relativism of these forces, the more the central aspiration in us grows. Because it's only something outside the system that can change it. It focuses our aspiration to that which is transcendent, to come in and create change, to transform. Transformation cannot happen within the system. Transformation has to come from a power outside the system. Yeah.
What would you say then is the significance in terms of like modern science, talking about electromagnetism as a force, and gravity as a force, and the strong and weak force? How do you see this, all this new, fairly new language about force, but it's sort of like imagined, we're affected by it, but it's sort of outside of us also?
I wouldn't say it's outside. It's a way of describing how matter works. It's the way of talking about what forces constitute material reality. And everything is constituted by these four forces, in terms of, the weak and the strong forces and electromagnetic forces, forces of gravitation and things of that nature. So it's a description of material universe, material cosmos in terms of forces. But it doesn't tell us about this opposition that is tearing it apart at the same time. Yeah.
Talking about these opposing forces, especially at the personal level, reminded me of pretty much what we started with in the morning session with the intuitive. And I'm wondering if it's a fair interpretation to say that within us we have these struggling forces, and is it to just sort of work with the intuitive for those deeper impulses to follow the deepest truth within you to get around or, ahead of the opposing force, so to speak?
Partly, yes. You see, there are many strategies towards it, but I think there's a central thing that he's getting at over here. One of the strategies, we have to empower the divine forces in us. There's no doubt about that. There's also the notion of what Jung would call integrating the shadow, right? In other words, we cannot neglect or other the shadow. The shadow exists with it in whatever relationship. But the really important thing that is being pointed out by this is the need for the aspiration to a greater force to intervene and transform us. This is the reason why the entire yoga of Sri Aurobindo hinges on the intervention of the supramental Shakti. We may or may not know what that is. We also may not tap into it at its highest reaches. But the more clear we become about the helplessness of the cosmos in the face of the condition of these pitched relative forces, the more powerful becomes our aspiration or call to that power to make its transformation. The transformation must come from the outside. Because here, we are given a condition in which death rules.
But you're saying that transformation should come from outside, but isn't that the whole point of evolution, that we evolve to that?
Yeah, but evolution is taking place within the cosmos. You see, so there are, one may say, this is the thing about the three powers of nature. The powers of nature are evolving within nature. So that first there is matter, and within it there is what I'm talking about, this call is going on from inside nature itself, because it's experiencing the struggle of that which is keeping it unconscious. You see, consciousness that is kept unconscious is aspiring in nature itself. And that is arriving at the descent of a higher power of consciousness, the consciousness of life. And you start having living matters, living matter and forms of living matter that can express a certain kind of immortality within this mortality. That immortality is the immortality of the persistence of the species. Individuals die, but the species remains. Then within that, there is still felt an aspiration for greater power, a power that can understand things and shape things. So mind is born in that. That's an evolution of a new consciousness. That also comes due to the same aspiration for something outside, which is not within what exists. From a certain point of view, it exists already here, but it's locked up. In a world with no mind, you can't even imagine what mind is. In a world with no life, you can't imagine what life is. In the same way, in a world without supermind, you can't imagine what supermind is. It's only at the most, a philosophical idea. But it can be an aspiration. We can aspire for something we don't know. In that sense, it's outside. It's inside, but it's locked up. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking in that note regarding humanity and evolution. We can look at these epochs or era like the Dark Ages versus the Enlightenment. where there's more of a collective effort to advance that, the evolution.
Yeah, these are all stages, you could say, in evolution. There are also stages in evolution. But there's a qualitative difference between that kind of a stage in evolution, which we could call cultural evolution. See, where what we are talking about as the evolutionary consciousness is mutating in terms of, its internal possibilities. You don't have a new kind of consciousness. You have a new operation of consciousness, from the one to the many, maybe. You see, but if you're talking about the entry of a new principle of consciousness, just like life entered matter or mind entered life, or rather a locked potential within matter opened up. You see, so both these are happening. It's both a descent and a unlocking that's going on. It's both transcendent and immanent. So that kind of thing, something within what exists becomes an intensity of aspiration that goes beyond the possibilities that exist. And that only happens when whatever exists reaches a certain kind of a critical point where this sense awakens that under our present conditions, we cannot move any further. I believe we are reaching that point as a species right now. Because we really don't have a solution.
So does that mean, it's irreparable and then that means it has to be destroyed and then recreated?
No, not necessarily destroyed. There have been destructions in the past. That's what the mother is saying, that repeatedly we've reached a point where we couldn't go any further and there's been a destruction and a starting again. But if the consciousness that exists reaches a critical point, it can call an intervention. It can intensify its collective aspiration. And what responds to that is a higher power of consciousness that changes the conditions. When we are talking about multiplicity, this is another way to understand multiplicity. Multiplicity includes unborn powers of consciousness that we don't even know exist right here and now. Yeah.
I was thinking, when you were talking about our aspiration for the supermental, I was thinking, well, how does the psychic being fit in this? And then I thought, we have to think about the Aurobindo put forth the triple transformation. So it's the aspiration of all three.
To start with, that's the psychic being, which is what we are talking about. To recognize the pitched relativity of our condition is to awaken, to kindle. It's like even to recognize these dualities is to invoke the flint with which the psychic flame is kindled. That's the result of the meditation. It invokes the psychic.
And the spiritual transformation can empower, and the supermental, once those two have been empowered, the supermental can.
Yeah, those are stages, but I think the first thing is to awaken the psychic, which is really the power. That is, when we are talking about the will to power, the will to power is ultimately the will of the psychic.
So, this multiplicity, if it increases at a critical point, and when we discover something, that's what evolving consciousness or manifestations is. And then in the first study session, you used the word archetype manifestation. So what would that be, and how is this?
An archetype would be, here in this context, an archetype would be like you could say the idea behind a new power of consciousness that has to descend. See, I don't remember what context I used archetype in.
You used archetype manifestation or something like that. I don't know.
So archetypal manifestations are non-evolutionary manifestations. Like the word of the gods is an archetypal word. See, the archetypal words are words that have got typal beings, beings that are fixed and manifest according to their natures. See? So they set up the conditions under which we are experiencing things. But we are evolutionary beings. In other words, we don't stay constant. We are constantly evolving, changing. We are under the power of change. This multiplicity is inside us as well. That's why we are never one thing. We are constantly either changing ourselves or bringing to birth new powers.
Right.
This is the thing about intensity. When it reaches a certain critical threshold, it becomes something else. Just like, water, when it reaches a certain temperature, becomes steam,
Right.
or ice becomes water. It's a change of state that takes place. But change of state means complete change of qualities,
Right.
qualitative change.
Can multiplicity word be also used as multidimensional?
Yeah, yes. It also means that multidimensional, if you use each of these states as a dimension, you can use it like that. But within a multiplicity, it's an infinity of qualities that under certain circumstances intensify one or the other and come into birth, and you change into that.
And sorry, Devash, to go off of the archetypal manifestations,
Yeah.
what I'm hearing it as is almost like that is the way in which we also divide and contain consciousness in some ways. And you just said that multiplicity has this potential for other possibilities and powers. So that's why we're trying to evolve. Like, that's why we don't want the multiplicity to end, like that, the rivers to end and to disappear into the oneness, because then we lose those potentials
Yeah.
and possibilities.
Exactly.
What's the best way to interpret the role or perhaps the purpose of an avatar incarnating within a certain time period?
So that's this, this is the reason why when we think about different traditions of avatars, it's in the Puranic tradition of avatars that the avatars keep coming. They're not. It's not just even. There's a common misconception that there are 10 avatars, but that's just some text says that there are 28 in some texts and 32 in some texts, and actually there's an infinite number of avatars. So the avatar is really a power of consciousness that just as we are talking about, that something exists here, but it can't manifest because we don't even know what it is. So we aspire for that, and the intervention that takes place is often in terms of a new consciousness that comes. But that consciousness may come through the actual appearance of a being that carries that consciousness and makes possible its precipitation. This is the way in which Sri Aurobindo and the mother are talking about their work, right? The whole idea of a descent of the supermind. Many people wonder, what the hell does that mean? I mean, there have been great teachers who have said, what is there to descend? Everything is already here. Yes, everything is already here. It's not yet activated.
I wanted to ask that also about archetypes, because we see sometimes human beings that seem very archetypal, you know, and is that an archetypal sort of descent coming into an evolutionary situation in
Yeah.
hopes of evolving or to assist the evolution because they can't do it?
Both,
there?
exactly, both those things that you just said.
Mm.
So there are archetypes that associate themselves with human beings
Yes.
and may even associate themselves with human beings in the psychic, you know, in other words, they fuse with the psychic. And that is an opportunity for their evolution. Or they may stay separate but associate themselves with the being, in which case that being starts expressing the powers of that archetype. Like, you know, I mean, depending on, I mean, there's so many beings. These people are what Sri Aurobindo refers to as the vibhutis. Most of them are archetypes that have associated themselves with some being. Some of them fused, like a Vivekananda would be an archetype that has fused with a psychic being.
I was thinking just about, earlier, you were just talking about the feeling of like, just this condition of the world and just the amount of fear that is growing. And there is a saying in the New Testament that perfect love casts out fear. And I think that the common understanding of that is like, if you have perfect love, it's like the devil. The fear will be, you know, cast out, exorcised. But there's also this other meaning that's completely opposite. Perfect love casts out fear like it's a net. So perfect love casts out fear as a net that gathers to itself.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like the opposite is
Yes.
included within.
Exactly.
Yeah. So these are the different models, just like we are talking about the either you can look at it as a churning of the ocean, or you can look at it as a battle. You know, these are different models for looking at the same thing. And I think these models are all valid, and I think they ought to all be considered. Each one is true in its own way in our lives.
Yeah. So they're both true.
Yeah. Tea time.